Hi guys, Kenna here, and today we're going to be going over classification. Now, I know we've hinted at this a little bit already with respect to the evolutionary relationships and how we know one species from another species when we were talking about dichotomous keys and these types of things, which we'll hit next. So, let's talk about a little bit about classification. Our essential questions for today are: number one, what are the 7 levels of the taxonomic hierarchy? Okay, so we'll go over these 7 levels and I'll help give you a way to help remember them, and then we'll talk about how they're related to each other. Essential question number 2, explain the purpose of binomial nomenclature. Now, we hopefully recognize that prefix bi means two. Nom, which we would have done if we'd done our warm-ups in class still, is name. And so to name, name, and clature. And clature is a system. So binomial nomenclature is a two-name naming system. And that tells you a lot about it already. And then essential question number 3, what are cladograms and how do they relate to molecular clocks? We briefly hinted at molecular clocks before when we were going ahead and looking at some of the evidence for evolution and the mechanisms for evolution in terms of genetic similarities. We'll talk about that a little bit more specifically today. All right, so let's go ahead and start talking about why we classify things. Classification is really a way for us to go ahead and apply a certain order to help us understand the natural world around us. So in biology, since we study life, what we're looking at is studying the diversity of life, and there's a lot of it out there. This is the work of Darwin. This is the work of Wallace. This goes back to Carl Linnaeus that we hinted at before. Biologists use classification system to name organisms and to group them into a logical manner so it's easier to understand the relationships between them and see how two species relate to each other. Okay? This avoids confusion caused by using regional or common names. Now, there are examples out there where people call the same thing different names. We can think about things like mountain lions. Mountain lions actually, depending on where you're at, have different names. They don't always call them a mountain lion. And so you may not know that you're talking about the same species, even though you are, because you're using different common names for that particular organism. So Carl Linnaeus was a Swedish botanist who developed a classification system that helped keep these things in order and gave us a very scientific name of naming organisms. Here is the classification system used by Linnaeus, and while we've restructured how we place organisms into this organization system, the organization system itself still is in place now that Linnaeus put in when he published his Systema Naturae. Okay, so from biggest to smallest, so the most diverse to the most specific, we go kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So there are 7 levels of the taxonomic hierarchy. Now, a lot of kids struggle with trying to go ahead and keep the different levels of the hierarchy straight. But I've found a lot of success in a song that I was taught back when I was high school. And obviously, if I still remember it, that's got to say something for the song itself. Now, it's silly, but it's kind of an earworm, and it gets stuck in your brain. And if you practice it a couple of times, this will stay with you for a long time, whether you want it to or not. So what I'd like to do is I'll go ahead and sing it to you once here, and then I would sing it again, but this time I hope you'll sing along with me so that you can kind of start practicing it, and then we'll go ahead and see if you recall it. Okay? So here's the way the song goes. Kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, class. Order, family, genus, species, science is a blast. Hey, kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, class. Order, family, genus, species, science is a blast. All right, so did you guys get that? I know I told you it was silly, but I'd like you to go ahead and practice it one more time with me. Please sing along. I know your parents are probably going to think you're crazy, maybe your siblings, but it's good practice and it will help you learn the 7 levels of the taxonomic hierarchy. Okay, so you ready? Let's try this again. Kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, class. Order, family, genus, species, science is a blast. Hey, kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, class. Order, family, genus, species, science is a blast. Good. All right, so now let's try and put it to use. So here we have the 7 levels of the taxonomic hierarchy once again. The first one is the kingdom. That's the largest of these levels. So take a minute, pause the video, and see if you can use the song to help you fill out the rest of this hierarchy. Okay, how did it go? Well, I hope. Well, let's go ahead and sing it one more time, and then let's go ahead and see if you guys were able to come up with it correctly. So if we start up here at the top with kingdom, we go kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, science is a blast. Hey, kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, science is a blast. Good. So once you've got that down, you now know the 7 levels of the taxonomic hierarchy. So let's talk about exactly what that means. Each one of these levels is known as a taxon. So kingdom is a taxon, phylum is a taxon. So each level or organizational system in our organizational system is called a taxon. And so the study of this process, or these different levels of organization, these taxons, is called taxonomy. So taxonomy is the study or discipline of classifying and naming organisms. Do not confuse it with taxidermy. Taxidermy is stuffing dead animals. Okay? So taxonomy is the study of naming organisms using these groups called taxons, which we break into 7 pieces, which are the levels or organizational levels of the taxonomic hierarchy. And that's the song we just learned. So let's see how those apply or relate to each other. We'll give you an example with a couple of species. So if we start here, you'll see that we're in the kingdom Animalia. This includes everything from the grizzly bear to the sea star. So there's a lot of diversity within the animal kingdom. As we go down the taxonomic hierarchy, we become more specific. As we get more specific, you're going to start dropping out some of the species that are less closely related. So the further down the taxonomic hierarchy you are, the more closely related they are. So stop, think about your song again, and see if you can come up with the next level of the taxonomic hierarchy. Kingdom, and then pause the video here. Good. Hopefully you guys were able to come up with the next one being phylum. So we go from kingdom of Animalia down to the phylum of Chordata. Now Chordata is from chordates. These are organisms that have a spine. And you'll notice that we dropped out a species. What species did we drop out? That's right, the sea star. So the sea star is actually an echinoderm and doesn't have a traditional backbone. So when we start looking at this, we're starting to make things more specific, so they're more related to each other than they were in the level of kingdom. So let's go on to the next level. The next taxon is what? Pause the video here, use your song to try and figure it out. So hopefully you said class. Okay, so kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, class. Now we're in the class Mammalia. These are our mammals. And so what did we drop out this time? That's right, we dropped out the coral snake. So the snake is not a mammal. And so if we take that out, now we're in organisms that are more closely related than we were at the previous 2 levels. So we're becoming more specific and narrowing down the number of organisms in each taxon. So let's try the next one. Kingdom, phylum, class. Pause the video here, see if you can come up with the next taxon. Hopefully you were able to come up with order. The order here is carnivora. These are our meat eating. Now it doesn't mean they only eat meat, but these are things that do eat meat. So your herbivores tend to drop out. And so what did we lose here? That's right, the A-bird squirrel. So we take out the squirrel and now we're down to things that actually will go ahead and eat other organisms. So kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, class, order. What's next? Use your taxonomic hierarchy song to try and figure out the next taxon. Pause the video here until you figured it out. Hopefully you were able to figure out that family is the next taxon. In this particular case, we are now in the family Ursidae. So we're looking at the bears, the greater bear family. What did we drop out? That's right, the red fox. So we take the fox out and we're down to our bears. Now, as we go down, remember we're getting more and more specific. And so when we start looking at this, these organisms are more closely related to each other, okay, the grizzly bear, black bear, and giant panda, than the sea star or the coral snake or the Aber squirrel, okay? So kingdom, phylum, class, order, family. Pause the video here until you know the next level. Hopefully you were able to figure out that the next taxon is that of genus. Now you'll notice that when we get to genus, we're in Ursus. This is the genus for true bears. And what did we drop out? That's right, the giant panda. And so now we're dealing with just traditional bears as we would go ahead and classify them. We have the grizzly bear and the black bear. And we're going to go down one more level, and hopefully this one is pretty easy. The last taxon is, that's right, the last taxon is species. So in this particular case, the grizzly bear has the species name of Arctos. So you'll notice here down at the bottom that we're going to go ahead and start looking at a two-name naming system. Okay, Ursus Arctos. Okay, this part of it is the species name, and this part of it, okay, is the genus name. This is how we write all scientific names, with the genus first and the species second. The genus is always going to be capitalized, and the species is always going to be lowercase. And both the genus and the species are going to be listed in italics. Now, when you handwrite this out, it may be hard to write in italics, but that's okay. But that's so you know that when you see it in print, you know that if it's in italics with the first one capitalized and the second one lowercase, this is probably the scientific name for the organism, okay, taken from the taxonomic hierarchy. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. When we go ahead and start taking a look at this process of binomial nomenclature, okay, this came from Linnaeus also. It is using the genus and species, and as I just showed you in the previous example, genus is always going to be capitalized, species is always going to be lowercase, and both are written in italics. So for the grizzly bear in the example before, you see the scientific name Ursus Arctos. Ursus capitalized, Arctos is lowercase. Both of them are in italics. So Ursus is genus and Arctos is species. I wanted to give you some examples from across the plant and animal world so that you guys can kind of see some of these. Some of the scientific names are derived from the common names. Some of them are based on where they were found, these types of things. So it's a variety of different methods by which we get these scientific names. But once the scientific name is established, it's commonly used across the world regardless of what language we're dealing with, and many of them are coming from Greek and Latin. So we can start out here when we go ahead and look at the peccary. Okay, the common peccary is Peccary tehaku, and so you'll notice that even though the spelling's different, the genus name is very similar to the common name. Okay, if we go ahead and look at the Cape porcupine, Hystrix right here, Hystrix is the genus for porcupines, and this particular one is Africa australis. Now the australis right here, australis, it means of the south. So Africa australis is southern Africa, and this is actually native to the Cape of South Africa. And so that's where its scientific name comes from. Okay. This is the spectral bat. This is in a genus known as vampire bats. And no, most of the vampire bats, most of the bats in general, do not suck your blood. Most of them are fruit eaters. This particular example is Vampirum spectrum, and so the spectrum comes from the common name spectral bat. So Vampirum spectrum. Here we have the western long-beaked echidna, Zyglosis, I'm not sure I can say this, brugni. Okay, Zyglosis brugni. This is the western long-beaked echidna. Okay, this is one of my favorites, and you're actually starting to see them come out a little bit here in spring. This is a great blue heron. our GBH. Ardea herodias is a beautiful bird if you get it in full color. And then I thought I'd take one of my favorite groups, which is the toads. The toads is actually a really kind of fun genus name. They're bufo. So this particular one is the endangered golden toad, and this is Bufo paraglans. Again, remember that genus is the first, it's always capitalized, species is second, and it's always lowercase, but both of these terms are in italics. All right, so let's try some of this on plants as well. Okay, so when you go ahead and look in the plant world, we have the same setup. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with plants, animals, bacteria, you name it. This is the naming system that we use in science. Okay, so let's start up here. This is the coastal Douglas fir. This should look very familiar to you guys. This is Pseudotsuga menzesii. Okay, now Suga is your firs, but this is actually pseudo. If you remember this, we talked about this in first semester. Pseudo prefix actually means false or incorrect. And so this is the false fir group, so the Douglas fir, and then menzesii. Now, some of these are going to be named after people that actually discovered or named them. Okay, here we have the dancing lady orchid. If you take a look here, I think this is the dress, wearing a hat up here, like a shawl or something like this. This is Oncidium or Oncidium. Oncidium is the genus for many of the orchids. This is one of the most diverse groups that we have in plant world. And Sphacelatum. Okay, we do this. My Hawaiian's not good. Mauhauhele. This is a hibiscus, and there's a huge genus of hibiscus, and this is named after Brackenridgei. You'll actually see this species name all over the place in the plant world. Brackenridge named a whole bunch of different plant species, and he just scientificized his last name. If you go over to the east side of the Cascades, you can look at the rest of these. These three are very common species over there, which is where I did a lot of my botanical work. This is Western Big Sage here on the left. Beautiful, one of the best smelling plants I've ever found. It's actually in this group called Artemisia is the genus. So it's a lot of your sages, and it has the name Tridentata. Now this particular one actually gets its name from the shape of its leaves. If you take a look at the leaves of this, okay, they're actually in fork shapes, kind of like this. They have 3 lobes, okay, 1, 2, and 3. And so Tridentata, that's where that name comes from, is from the actual shape of the leaves, okay? Next, we're going to go ahead and take a look at Festuca idahoensis. Festuca is the genus for the fescues, and they just took the name of the state where it was native to, and they turned it into a science word, idahoensis. So Festuca idahoensis. And last one here is Bromus tectorum. This is the horrible cheatgrass. If you've ever gone hiking with boots and socks and shorts, this is the stuff you get caught all through your socks. Okay, this is cheatgrass. And I had a friend when I was in high school when we were doing a research study on burn cycles over in Eastern Oregon. He was a big metalhead, and so he always thought this would be the greatest name for a heavy metal song, right? Bromus, Bromus tectorum, Bromus. But anyway, so what you're looking at here are a whole bunch of examples of your binomial nomenclature. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on and talk a little bit about the difference between a cladogram and traditional classification system. If you remember when we were talking about species, we talked about the fact that historically they were primarily compared morphologically or based on their physical characteristics. And so originally these trees were based on observable traits. But they've changed over time as we've started to include more genetic information about the organisms. And these new evolutionary trees that include genetic information are what we call cladograms. In a traditional classification system, if you were to look at things like the crab, barnacle, and limpet, you would place the barnacle and limpet as being more closely related because they have conical shaped shells, and the crab looks quite different from the barnacle and limpet. But when we went back and started doing genetic analysis of these same 3 species, we started realizing that the barnacle was actually more closely related to the crab than it was to the limpet. Okay, all three of them start out with tiny free-swimming larvae, but then the limpet kind of stays there. The barnacle and crab both exhibit molted exoskeletons and segmentation. So these are characteristics that describe the development and physical structure of the species based on their genetic history. So in this case, we switched whether the barnacle was more closely related to the limpet in traditional classification versus that of the crab in a cladogram. Here's an example of a cladogram as well. It is very common that people would say, oh yes, a giant panda and a lesser panda are probably very closely related, but it turns out that they are not. The lesser panda is actually more closely related to a raccoon than it is to the giant panda, which is more closely related to the bear family. So when we go ahead and start taking a look at these relationships, physical characteristics can be deceiving, especially when we start looking at things like convergent evolution, where species develop similar traits because they have similar roles in their ecosystems. Okay? So when we start building these cladograms or evolutionary trees, what are we looking for? What we're really looking at primarily is their genetic material. How similar is their DNA? After we look at their DNA similarity, then we still look at physical features, and then we go ahead and include geographic location. Is it possible that these two are from the same precursor species, that type of thing? The differences in the genetic code can be used to determine just how closely related two species are and how long ago their evolutionary paths diverged. This is that idea of derived characteristics that Darwin talks about in his Descent with Modification. The idea that there is a common ancestor for all species. We just need to know how far back does that go before these two species diverged. And this tool of using genetic similarity to go ahead and classify organisms at the molecular level is what is known as the molecular clock. Okay, we use how many mutations or differences have accumulated over time to go ahead and determine how long these two species have been evolving independently. Now, I'd like to say that this is it and we're done, but there's just a little bit more to understand. Since the time of Linnaeus, we have added another layer to the taxonomic hierarchy. This actually goes above kingdom. Okay, this is the area known as domains. And there are three domains that we recognize. We have bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. These groups are divided based on their cell structure. Scientists currently recognize 6 different kingdoms that are placed into these domains. We have the eubacteria, which is in the domain of bacteria. We have archaebacteria, which is in the domain of archaea. And then we have protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia, which are in the domain of eukarya. These ones over here that are in eukarya are actually our eukaryotic cells. Okay, if you remember back to first semester, okay, these are our eukaryotes. Okay, eukaryotes. Oh, should try not writing it next time, right? Not great on the computer. Maybe we'll try typing it. So these are eukaryotes. And if we go ahead and take a look up here, okay, these are going to go into our prokaryotes. That's better. Okay, so eukaryotes down here and prokaryotes up here. Let's just make this, that's easier. All right, so we have our eukaryotes here. We have our prokaryotes here. All right. Now, when we go ahead and start looking at this, we can start looking at their evolutionary relationships. You'll notice that there's probably a common ancestor back here, although we're not 100% sure of exactly what that was or what that looks like. And then you see 3 branches leading to the 3 different domains. We have the domain bacteria, okay? This is going to be your eubacteria. We have the domain archaea, which is going to be your archaebacteria. And then you go into your eukarya or eukaryotic organisms. Okay, you have your protists here. Okay, you're going to go ahead and deal with your plants, fungi, and animalia in terms of the kingdoms that fall within those particular domains. So it doesn't work as well for the song. There is no kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, science is a blast that includes domain. But if you can remember the song I gave you and then remember that domain is just one bigger than that, you should be in good shape. So if we were to go ahead and classify all these living things, these are the differences. And if you want to go into these differences in more detail, you can go ahead and pause the video and read this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but this is how we go ahead and compare those three different domains within the higher level above the taxonomic hierarchy. But you can also see the kingdoms here as well. Okay? All right. Hope you guys are doing well. Take care of yourselves. So long.